I'm a visitor from Leeds today, so thanks for having us along. So I'm Emma Peasland, and I'm here on behalf of my colleagues Andrew and Anne, who couldn't be here today, to tell you a story about what we think is mainly a successful change in our Welcome Induction and Transition project or provision at Leeds. So I thought I'd start with this question: do you like change? I think it might be fair to say that sometimes as humans we can be somewhat resistant to change. And so we found it to be quite a useful exercise to have a look at this kind of change programme or transformation, as it's sometimes called, to understand what was successful about it and why, and how that kind of provision has evolved over I think we're in the third year now of this transformation. So I'm talking about our Welcome Induction and Transition programme, but I'll refer to it as WIT because it's a lot easier to say. This transformation in WIT, the main kind of output of this is a university-wide digital resource. And like lots of new digital things, the kind of need for this was the pandemic. So that created a sense of urgency for a transformation around WIT activity at Leeds. But it wasn't the first time WIT had been considered, and there'd been a couple of kind of pedagogic research projects considering this WIT-related activity. So the MATI project listed there was one that focused on taught postgraduate provision, and the Elixir project, which the image is kind of looked at links between induction, exit and retention. And some of kind of the key findings from these projects were that a lot of WIT activity was largely delivered at kind of school or faculty level. And across that, there were examples of excellent resources, but it was inconsistent across the whole of the university, and that WIT activity kind of lacked a unifying thread. Another kind of key thing is that induction was often thought of as kind of this short period of information transmission. So like, here's what you need to know to come and study here or to move to a new level of study. So when we looked at our change, we started to look at it. We used kind of three analytical lenses to kind of understand it. So I'll run through those briefly now. The first one is this transition pedagogy from Sally Kift and colleagues. And some of the key kind of things about transition pedagogy are that transition shouldn't just be this short period of information transition like a traditional Freshers' Week model perhaps. It should be kind of a process rather than that short event. It should be everybody's business at the university, so a variety of academic and professional services staff should have a stake and an interest in supporting WIT. And it's most effective if it's aligned with or underpinned by the curriculum. The second kind of model that we used is this Cotter's change management model, and this is really widely used across higher education and other kind of businesses and organisations. And it's this 8-step model, and it's quite kind of top-down. Okay, so if you think about like senior managers identifying a need for a change, this is a model that, if you follow all the steps, could bring your organisation along with you for that change. And one of the key premises is that these steps should be completed in order. There shouldn't be much overlap between the steps, and there shouldn't really be kind of any back and forth across the steps. And then this third kind of approach is a co-evolutionary theory, and this is a systems thinking kind of approach where we look at the actors within a system, and in our case it's the students in the university, the staff working in faculties, schools or services, and our Welcome and Induction and Transition team, which I'll talk a bit more about in a moment. And this model helps us to look at how those different actors interact within the system of the university and the wider system that the university acts in. So things like COVID and educational policies are particularly relevant, particularly in the early stages of this transformation. So I'll tell you a little bit about the story then. So I'm going to use Cotter's model, that middle one, to kind of go through the early steps. So that first step is you need a sense of urgency. Well, we didn't need to create a sense of urgency because the pandemic happened. And so the second step then was you need a guiding coalition. So at Leeds, this guiding coalition was made up of an academic lead, who was my co-author Anne, Existing people working in the WIT space, like Andrew, my other co-author, and his collaborator Ruth, who did that Elixir project, and members of the digital education service, because it's an online resource or a digital resource. These people then need to develop a vision and a strategy. So that guiding coalition started to draw on the previous research, like the Elixir projects that had taken place. They identified those really great examples of localised practice, and they started to plan this kind of institution-wide resource. Step 4 is that you need to communicate your vision and enlist a volunteer army to help make that happen. And at Leeds, in that early stages of the pandemic, that was this, well, it still is, a WIT network. In the early stages, it had around 200 people in it, and that was kind of the first example of it perhaps becoming everybody's business, and now it's got about 400 people across the institution who have specific kind of interest in or responsibilities for WIT activity. And I'll come back to that again. Step 5 is empowering broad-based action, and this is about tackling barriers to change. So one of the kind of key things in this example is that by providing an online institution-level resource, that kind of frees up loads of time for schools because they no longer need to transmit this institution-level information, and so hopefully there's space to perhaps put in some community building provision to allow students to start to meet each other. And then step 6, generating short-term wins. So this is the first example. This is an example of the stage at which the first iteration of our digital resource was created. So all that existing practice is drawn together, lots of new stuff is created as well, and it's all collated in this novel online resource, which was housed in our VLE. And it was kind of a 2-part resource. So half of it was called Arriving and Joining, and that's that, like, I need to know this now to start here. And then the second part was called Developing and Planning, and that was a bit more kind of longer term stuff because it takes that more process transition approach. So it has things like careers and that kind of thing in it as well. But we're going to stop kind of following Kotter's model now, because here it kind of stopped working to explain the transformation. And I think, so we've gone from step 1 to step 6, and then we have these kind of latter 2 steps. But one of the things that I mentioned before is this is a top-down model, and you have to do everything in order. And that kind of stopped working in this context. And I don't know whether that's kind of typical of higher education or specific to WIT or something like that. But interestingly, in the literature around Kotter, it talks about the fact that these last 2 steps are less well validated. So, yeah, maybe this is an example of why. And instead, this model starts to help us to understand the change and what in particular or where it was most successful in becoming an embedded transformation. So this helps us to understand why things were done the way they were done in Leeds in 2020 and beyond. So I'm going to run through some of these kind of later changes, because in this model, of course, we have these 3 actors in the university infrastructure, and that's things like the distribution of schools and faculties, but it's also like, what does the VLE look like? What digital resources are there available to host your online resource? And then things like the COVID context, so things like, do you remember when we were all invited to eat out to help out? That kind of thing made people think, oh yeah, let's do more things in person. So that had an impact on the kind of WIT activity that was expected and could be offered. We've got here then our 3 different groups: students, the WIT team, and schools, faculties or services, and a couple of time landmarks in here. And yeah, I'll just kind of run through what happened. So we are in kind of that 2020, 2021, just before that 2020, 2021 academic year. And the first iteration of the resource has been shared and it's been used, and the WIT team commissioned a formal evaluation. And this is actually where I joined the university. So I started at Leeds in April 21, and this was one of the first projects that I started on, was working on this evaluation. So I work in our Institute for Teaching Excellence, and this was one of the projects that we supported. So we collected feedback from students and from staff as well, and kind of some of the key messages then. Everyone was positive about the introduction of this resource and it being a useful and a beneficial thing. But the key messages from students were that from our usage analysis of usage data, it showed that they used that early arriving and joining content, but they didn't come back to the developing and planning content. And that they said they had far too many emails at the start of their academic year. They used words like overwhelming. Staff had the opposite problem with communications. They didn't see the resource early enough, they didn't really know what was going to be in it, and so they couldn't necessarily plan to incorporate it into their WIT activity. But everyone was positive, and so the need was identified for a PGT-focused version for the January 2021 intake. Based on that feedback, resource version 2 was created, and in this one it had more student-created content, because that was one of the things the usage data showed students concentrated on or kind of revisited. And it came along with a communications template. So this is like weekly emails, pre-populated with institution-level WIT content that then schools, faculties and programmes can put that local information onto. Whilst this was going on, students kind of got into this idea of like this extended welcome, and they identified a need for some WIT activity after Christmas and campaigned to have a Fresh Start festival. And so that ran for the first time in January 2021, and it was student-led, but it was facilitated by the WIT team. Students were really positive about this Fresh Start Festival, and at the same time, so this kind of idea of this longer-term WIT is being discussed across the university, and the university leadership adopted a position whereby it was going to become a year-round activity. And here we're going to start to see some shaded boxes, and these represent those kind of milestones of where this transformation starts to become embedded. So because it's now this high-level supported year-round activity, we need some people to make sure that happens, and so academic staff with roles specifically related to WIT and student success started to be workloaded for that activity, and there was a professional services team appointed to manage WIT provision across the university. A second evaluation has taken place of that version 2 of the resource, and there's some more feedback from students. It had been split across multiple platforms, and that was confusing, because where do you go to find the things you need to know or are interested in? And so that kind of brings through the third iteration of the resource, which was released at the start of this academic year. And alongside that, WIT is now embedded into that kind of central communications activity, so both for existing students who are returning and for new students who are joining the university. And alongside that, the WIT network has continued to exist, and it's grown, and lots of kind of conversations start to go on. It's housed in a Microsoft Teams space, and it's become this sort of supportive, self-organised and self-sustaining community so far, and hopefully it will continue. And then that's kind of where we're up to. So now this kind of reiterates, but we can see that it's not that kind of simple process of being like, let's follow our 8 steps. Actually, people give feedback, we need to reiterate, and if you compare it to that Cotter model, maybe it's an example of those last 2 steps being iterative, but apparently you're not allowed to do that if you are following that model. So anyway, so to go back to those kind of 3 lenses, we started off with transition pedagogy, and this is like a useful underpinning. So we've moved hopefully towards an example of WIT being everybody's business, or a business of a lot of people in different roles across the university, and it's becoming embedded into the university practice, but it doesn't help us really understand how we got there. Cotter's model helps to explain that those kind of the top-down nature helps to explain those early steps, because this was like an emergency pandemic response. So that early stage in creating the first iteration was quite a top-down process. But later, everything became a bit more organic and emergent as the different people involved started to interact with each other and give feedback. So then the latter part is perhaps best explained by this kind of co-evolutionary theory that looks at those interactions. It kind of allows you to learn from what's gone on and iterate and that kind of thing, and it acknowledges how the structure's changed. Like you can imagine now, going into the 4th version in the coming academic year, provision will be completely different from how it was in that coming out of that first lockdown. So it acknowledges changes to the structure. So we would suggest or argue that this kind of combined approach helps us to understand the process most effectively. So whilst you might say, oh, well, let's do a change, how can we go about that change? Actually, maybe lots of different models are the best approach. So I'll leave you with these kind of reflections specifically on welcome, induction and transition, but I won't go through them all because I've been talking for the right amount of time-ish. Yeah, thank you for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah, go ahead.
It's really good to see this talk about this change thing. Following the evaluation you talked about, you said that the emails or the communication was streamlined and more of it was student-centered content.
Yes.
How was it before? And what actually was the student-centered content? If you can give an example.
Yeah, sure. So in the first iteration of the resource, so I don't know so much from before that, before my time. Alison's also from Leeds, she might be able to provide some context. So in the first iteration, it was videos from students and by students about their experience of joining the university. So that's an example that springs to mind of some of the stuff that students were revisiting in the usage data and spending longer on those pages. So like what was popular in the usage data was like, how do I get on the internet? And like what have other students who've gone before me said about this experience and what kind of tips can I learn from them? I am less familiar with the second iteration of the resource and the ones after that, but certainly they commissioned more of that. And in the second iteration, it was split across two platforms. So the need to know information, like how do I get on the internet, that was housed in PebblePad, the like portfolio software. So it was behind a login. And then there was like nice to know information, which was more of that student created content. So like blog pieces, videos, that kind of thing. And that was housed on Medium, so that was publicly accessible. But that was one of the criticisms of that, like where do you go for which information?
So it seems, is this undergraduate transition you're looking at only, or does it extend as well to postgraduate? And I'm not sure if you were here in the morning session when we're hearing from the students, basically. Sometimes as well, there are, we need similar transitions to potentially international students, or, as well, even on the postgraduate side, home students that have been away for such a long time and coming back. So I'm not sure, how much of this activity is just focused on undergraduate, or does it have other, hats everywhere, and does it have the same challenges? And what did you, are there any learnings from there?
So yes. So the first iteration of the resource had kind of three versions. So it had you're new to Leeds and you're an undergraduate version. They didn't, I believe, there were no taught postgraduate students who joined in September 2020, and instead the intake was in January 2021. So there was a specific version of the resource for taught postgraduate students joining then. And then there was another version which had a slightly different name, I forget what it was called. The first one was Getting Started at Leeds. The PGT one was Transition to Leeds. And then there was another one which was aimed at existing students returning in a radically different context, and that's a transition to a new level of study. So that kind of the different levels piece. And then one of the things with sort of the usage data showed, I think, something like, this is going back a couple of years out of my memory, but international students engaged with the resources less, but they were also supported by existing comprehensive programmes by the International Students Office, for example. So there was a really good offer there already, and that's an example of perhaps where the first iteration of the WIT resource didn't necessarily align so well with existing provision because of that late kind of messaging to staff at the university, possibly. But yeah. Cool. Well, thanks very much for having me.
So I'm Samarthia Thankappan and this is Tamsin. We both did this research together. So we're going to play a dual role today. So I'll hand it over to Tamsin to start it off, and then I'll take it on from there.
Brilliant, thank you. I planned this, Samarthia did all the slides, so I did really well, and Samarthia did all the hard work, and I just get to show up and claim credit. So just a little bit of context, we are both currently lecturers in the Environment and Geography department, and we're part of a teaching and learning group that's mostly comprised of TNS staff, so teaching and scholarship staff, but we do have a few academic research and teaching staff who come along as well. And we have these roughly fortnightly meetings just to check in throughout term time, share what's going well, and share potentially what needs a little bit more support. And one of the things that kept coming up again and again and again all through the first and the second terms is, I'm really enjoying the teaching, the students that we've got are really engaged, but we've not got many of them. And I think this isn't something that's unique to our department. I hope it's not unique to our department, because this was staff from a range of degree streams. And we really wanted to understand why. Why aren't the students actually showing up? Because we want them there. We want them in the classroom. We want to know that they're enjoying the content that we're putting a lot of work into teaching. And the more we kind of talked about it, the more we realised that potentially what's going on is that there is a mismatch between what we are thinking of as the student experience. So for us, potentially, what we think of as the student experience at university is lots and lots of learning, a little bit of social time. And maybe there's this mismatch going on in this understanding of student experience. So it led us to this question. Do staff and students perceive student experiences in the same way? This is what we wanted to find out. Because there's quite a lot of information from the institutional perspective. So the institutional understanding is that students have three core things that they interact with that make up this student experience. This idea of academic and intellectual development, community activities and networking, and the welfare and the support services. Now within our department, teaching staff are probably mostly involved in the academic and intellectual development, and there might be some community activities and networking that we're running, but again that tends to be very much through the lens of academic and intellectual development. We talk about sort of skills fairs, for example, or employability fairs, that kind of thing. Welfare and support services tend to be more managed either internally by the student support team or at the wider university level. We don't have a huge amount of interaction with that. And how much that really frames the student experience, I'm not too sure. But obviously these are the three kind of key pillars from an institutional perspective. But the students are going to value these components differently. So from an institutional perspective, yes, lots of this please, because this influences our scores, our league table rankings. But from a student perspective, particularly in the context of students who are coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've had a lot of disruption to their education and their development. Potentially this is where it's, the focus is for them. But we also need to consider the fact that demographic factors, individual personality, the aspirations, and even the academic ability of the students will all vary. So when they're coming to us at university, they've already got a kind of profile, and no student is going to be the same, because each student's journey to university is going to look slightly different, depending on all of these factors. So while we've got these three pillars, from an institutional perspective, this is what we can offer, it's going to look different. So the language that we're using as academic staff potentially is already going to be different to that. We can use the same language, but potentially mean very different things. So from an academic perspective, our general assumption, yes, classroom attendance leads to better performance in varying degrees. This even came up in the plenary this morning, right? The students were talking about the fact that if they feel engaged, they feel that that's reflected in the grades that they get. However, the deviation in the debate is more to do with the fact that from an institutional perspective, we're concerned with retention of these students. We're concerned with student experience mostly as it relates to how we do from an institutional performance perspective. And there's not really very many studies that are there from the student perspective at all. No one's really asking the students, what to you is the university experience, and how then is that impacting things like your attendance at lectures and taught sessions? So we really wanted to understand how students conceive their experiences within the higher education context, and whether that aligns with those of their institution. So we did a study. We did 2 parts of the study. I did the first part, so I will do my bit, and then Samarthia can take over for the difficult bit that she did. The first thing we did was an online survey. So this got distributed to all undergraduates in environment and geography. This was mostly a Likert scale, so we went from sort of 1 seriously disagree, slightly agree, all the way through to strongly agree. There we go, not seriously. We had quite a good response rate, I felt. We had 43 responses, most of which were first and third year, not too many for the second year. But we asked students about what kind of factors are impacting your attendance. What are you valuing with attendance? What makes you want to come? What are you attending instead of talk sessions if you're not able to come along to those? And then Samarthia did some focus groups. Shall I hand over?
Okay. So just wanted to point out another thing, that this is more of an ongoing study as well. We want to identify even the institutional perspectives, academic staff perspective as well. So this was what we're talking today is mainly to do with the student perspective. So in addition to what Tamsin had carried out, the online survey, again, a wealth of information is out there. We just picked and chose, selected some of the things to present it today. What I did was I ran 6 focus group discussions with undergraduates across year 1, year 2 and year 3, but predominantly of the 6 focus groups, 4 of them were undergraduate students, and 1 for second years and 1 was for third year students. So in terms of the areas we explored, combined with online survey as well as the focus group discussions, was in terms of assessments. What are the kind of assessments they like, what do they favor more in terms of the types of assessments, how comfortable they are. Range of questions were included. Attendance in taught sessions, why they are attending or why they're not attending, for example. What are the motivating factors? What are the driving factors behind attendance? And the feedback that they get from the staff members, for example. How do they use that feedback? Do they like the feedback? Don't they like the feedback? So range of things were explored. And also we had to ask them, what exactly is learning experience from your point of view? What do you see as a learning experience? Because we wanted to see whether it is aligning with the institutional perspective or the staff perspective. So given the key focus here, we wanted to talk about the attendance aspect. So I'm just picking a couple of threads in terms of the findings. So in terms of the attendance at taught sessions, this came out from the online survey that 72% of them were more likely to miss the morning sessions. Now, I dug deep into that in the focus group discussions. Why? Why is it that you don't like the 9 o'clock sessions? And so, again, there was a wealth of information that came out of it, which I'll talk about it a bit later. And there was a resounding feedback from the students, especially in the focus group discussions, that the preferred time where they perform really well in terms of learning experience is 10 to 4 p.m. So nothing earlier, nothing later. And 81% of them prioritized an upcoming assessment over a taught session. So if they had an assessment due, they would skip the session. Now, that was irrespective of it was 9 o'clock or 12 o'clock or whichever o'clock it was. So a majority of them preferred that they spend focused time on their assessment and they were willing to skip that. So just put a quote as well. Despite phases of missing attendance, I'm always then prioritizing the coursework and what materials will be most relevant to the question. Now, since we saw that 72% of them preferred not attending the morning classes and would 82% then skipping or prioritizing coursework or assessment, we wanted to explore how then did they access the course material if they missed it, or where did they go for it. again, there was a majority of them saying that we are really confident that we can catch it up. And where did they catch it up from? Slides and recordings. So they relied so much on the slides and the recordings. And about 42% of them were very confident that even if they didn't catch it up on the slides and the recordings, they are confident that they could reach to the staff member who delivered the sessions and they can get things, whatever they wanted. Any queries, any doubts, they can get that sorted. Again, this was quite interesting. Very low incentive to attend lectures as they are recorded and can be viewed at 2 times faster. We can save upon our time. Saving on time, physical and mental energy. And then there was another one that in general attendance hasn't affected my grades too much. But of course that extra small details of engaging with peers, for example, in seminars and tutorials, that bit we might be missing out. So in a sense, we are there, we can manage things without attending sessions. So then we thought, okay, what are the drawbacks in terms of your learning experience? So that again was another thing that I explored in the focus group discussions. What stops you from getting the learning experience that you are looking for? And again, a range of responses came, and something that was very prominent is what I've kind of listed here, is lack of consistency in advice and feedback, response times to email queries. So students, and why I asked this question and I listed this is we wanted to link it back. Are these impediments in some way linked to the learning experience that they are envisioning? So when I explored more in detail, they said some staff members are really good at providing advice, and that makes us more motivated to attend their classes, for example. The ones that are very, they don't give a good feedback or don't respond to our queries, we're not really interested in attending their classes. Variability in the use of technology by tutors. Now, that again was an incentive for students to attend those staff members' classes or lectures. They thought, they are very keen into new technology and up with the, what's happening in terms of technology. And again, there was a resounding agreement in terms of the tutors' enthusiasm and passion. They said they are very motivated to attend the class lectures. And now I queried, would it be 9 o'clock as well or after 4 o'clock? Yes. If the tutor is extremely enthusiastic, very bubbly, very knowledgeable about, not much about knowledge, but they just talked about somebody exuding exuberance and very active and enthusiastic and passionate about the subject, they would attend their classes. And lack of creative and engaging methods of delivering the taught materials kind of links to the technology aspects as well, that they would love to attend those classes where there are creative and engaging methods used by the tutor or the academic. So in the focus group, we asked about the attendance, reasons behind attendance and their preferences. Then we asked about what are the impediments. Then we also wanted to know what is it that they think would improve their learning experiences, which is what kind of transformational things that we need to bring in. And that again, I was quite surprised by the kind of things that they talked about in the focus group. One was the co-creation of practices and assessment development. They wanted to be a part of the process in terms of creating teaching materials as well as assessments. They want to be a partner in that co-creation thing, which was really good and which we're thinking of integrating it in the restructure. A move from consumers to co-creators in the learning committee instills confidence. I mean, when they mentioned that we want to be co-creators in the process, I said, what is the benefit that you're envisioning? That the immediate thing was that instills confidence in them. Assessments to be set in such a way that prepares them for the future career. So they wanted it, things like, moving away from essays and exams and things like that, more into policy briefs, for example. Those were the kind of things that will prepare them for future career prospects. And also, almost all of them said no to exams. They said that coursework actually enabled them to explore and engage with the wider literature, for example, and that is a lot more useful for them to engage with the knowledge surrounding the area, on that particular area. So that was about the academic aspects. Now, the second thing we looked at was the community experiences. I mean, Damson did mention about the 3 criteria, so we looked at the community experiences. We have a lot of information on that, but we haven't had the time to explore deeper into this element of it. So the key themes that arose was they were very keen, students were very keen that we need to celebrate student achievements more, recognition more is to be given for whatever they achieve, and their contributions. More opportunities to engage with tutors. Again, this was something that has come out in not just the focus group, but otherwise in student action group discussions and with the ambassadors. I mean, at various junctures it had come up that many students didn't engage well with their staff or didn't know their staff well. They only knew, well, if they have turned up to the class, they would know. But they felt that there's a bit of a distance between the tutor and the student community. So they would like more opportunities created to know their tutors more. And they liked a good balance, or they wanted more balance between social events and taught sessions. So that was about the community experience. So we did was, rather than simply saying conclusion, and this is what I wanted to tie it with the theme of this conference, supporting the student journey, and pulled out 4 key areas we think if we work on this, we'd be able to support the student journey. And I hand it over to Tamsin to just summarize that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. When we went through, we just thought there were kind of 4 key points that we need to really bear in mind from this. And as we say, it's an ongoing study. It's something we're still wanting to explore in depth, bringing in the staff voice as well. But we think in general communication, so explicit articulation of the expectations, and understanding what university experiences entail from the staff perspective and from the student perspective. What are they expecting? What are we expecting? Where is the mismatch? And how do we overcome that slightly to make a more valuable experience for everyone? And also considering about the deeply embedded issues. We did ask, we didn't obviously have time to share it all here, but in the questionnaire we did ask, are there any other circumstances? Do you not come to the lectures when it's raining, for example? What are other issues that are responsible for low attendance that we're not capturing here? The thing is, it doesn't really matter sometimes in terms of attendance. If your student decides that they're not going to get out of bed for 9 a.m. because they're watching it online, it's almost immaterial whether they watch it online or not, because you've already lost that student in the classroom. So what else is going on? How do we bridge that gap? We also need to think about the strategic and long-term planning skills. The students are showing these, but not in the direction that we want. They are planning, they are making assumptions that I'll skip this lecture to prioritise my assessment. But again, we're thinking in terms of when you have a workplace, generally you're expected to be there 9 till 5, depending on the job. So yeah, no one likes 9 a.m. lectures, but part of the skills that we're developing is the ability to get up on time and to actually be here. Which sounds a little bit harsh, a bit mercenary, I appreciate, but it is an important skill that they are going to have to develop. But we also think, I'm sure many of you have seen there's a new tracking system coming in, Check-in, I think it's called. That's going to be something to watch out for to see if that does impact attendance. If in environment and geography we don't currently track attendance, if students know that they're being expected to check in and someone might chase up if they're not in sessions, is that going to change the number of bums on seats? So I think those are all our main points. Thank you, everybody. Any questions? Yeah, Carol.
Sorry, you mentioned somewhere that, they're expecting creative methods from engagement from the lecturer. Did you explore further a little bit more about what do they consider as creative methods?
Yeah, we didn't explore in detail in terms of what is it they want. I did question them, what do you mean by creative methods? They made it clear that it was nothing the mundane kind of thing, come to a lecture, present a lecture, the teacher is talking, giving, but you need some methods that allow that engagement and that use of technology as well, because they feel that, for example, they can't take notes, but they are very good at recording things and working on their mobile, for example, or laptops, for example. So any technology that is very different from the trodden path, for example, the traditional ones, and that allows them to engage more as well digitally.
Hi, I was really interested in the feedback that students were prioritising assessments over coursework or, attending the sessions, which suggests that they don't see that the two are
Integrated.
Yeah. In your study, have you or are you considering thinking about how you can embed more assessment literacy into those sessions?
I think part of this is we are restructuring our teaching at the moment, environment geography, quite significantly. So I think a lot of people are looking at the kind of assessments that we're delivering and looking at more of a portfolio approach to assessments. But as Sam, I don't know if you were here in the last session, Sam from chemistry had similar issues. The students, we can see the joined up nature of all of these things will contribute to your assessments. Students don't necessarily see that.
No.
And it's that conflict again between university's product and university's degree. The students want university's experience. Students want the degree to go out and get the job, but they're not necessarily seeing the long-term learning that we're trying to develop.
But I think it's also about being explicit with the language that we use.
Yeah.
And this is what we wanted to see.
Yeah.
We need to be very explicit about it.
Yeah.
And we have been I think some of us in our modules, we do clearly state, if you're doing this links to your career, this links to this links to it. But sometimes, you think that it will be picked up, but looks like it isn't. Maybe somewhere, I'm not saying it's they are not picking up. Maybe we are not communicating it in the appropriate way for them to absorb it. So that rethinking needs to happen, and we have to think about it, how well we can explicitly articulate this message.
Yeah, I mean, in my context, me and my colleagues have found that we have to be quite instrumental in the language we use and say, right, if in order to get a good grade in your essay, you need to do X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to show you now how to do that. And if they know that that's going to be happening in the sessions, then they're going to miss out on that if they don't come to the sessions. Then that's another motivator, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Hello, I am Chloe Dickinson. I work at YUSU. I'm the Student Engagement Development Coordinator. So I do a lot of work at YUSU around academic representation and kind of student engagement more widely. And just in this session, I'm going to talk about what we've been doing these last few months and the research we've been undergoing and how we want to support and encourage teaching and learning staff and communities to really empower academic representation in their roles. So that's what I'm going to look at here. So we've conducted some research over this past term with surveys and focus groups, and I just wanted to pull out a couple of those findings because they're kind of really instrumental in the work that we have then done since, and how I'm stood here telling you why you should be doing these things, because it's come from a place of knowledge, not just me telling people to do things. So one key thing that's really come out of all the research that we've done is there is a real lack of clarity around what this representative role is and should be. Kind of students saying, I didn't know they existed, or I don't know what they're meant to be doing, or when I should go to them, or why. Bit of context as well for the start. For this last year, we've been trying a new pilot project. That's why I've done this research, trying to figure out what we should do next. We've talked to students about what's worked this last year and what hasn't. Sorry, I forgot to add that at the start. Yes. So students have expressed an interest to want more in-person things and more frequent interactions with their reps. A lot of them saying, oh, you know, we saw them at the start of the year, but then haven't seen them since. Or we've had one email about them and then not heard anything from them. And that's kind of the same kind of thing, like they don't know who they are. They've not seen their faces out and about. They have no concept. Like I said, they talk about them at the start of the year, but then throughout the year there's no regular kind of, this is who you're going to, this is who I am. There's none of that throughout the year. Again, visible at the start of the year, but then not throughout. And I don't want anyone to get upset by this one, but there is a feeling among students that departments aren't acting on feedback, and we know that departments are, so clearly what's happening here is a breakdown in communication of maybe you're telling the rep that and then they're not telling the students, or something's just going wrong along that way, because we know departments are making changes. We're aware of that, but students don't also have that perception of what's going on. And again, because they don't feel like anything's going on, there's this idea that it's pointless to go to your rep, there's no changes being made. And lots of kind of students saying, well, I'll just go and talk to my supervisor myself and deal with it myself. Why do I need to go to my rep when I can get it fixed directly? Which is the last point on there as well. So lots of things kind of coming out, and I feel like we know a lot of these things, we're quite aware of these issues and what's going on, but it's kind of good to have that confirmed to us of these things that are going on. So, throughout the research as well, we're kind of comparing these two systems that we've got. And that's the direction we need to go. We've got this feedback, we're talking to students, but where do we go now? We've tried this pilot project over this last year, we've got some people still doing course reps and department reps, where do we take it? So we start to have conversations with departments about what next year looks like. And there is no drastic differences in our research between what students in student action group, pilot project departments are saying and what students in course rep departments are saying. Sorry for those of you from Leeds who are like, I've got no idea what you're talking about. Or anyone else for that matter. If you need more context, please do ask me. I'm just trying to get through it so we don't get through lunch. There are no drastic differences. Students don't have a clear preference. There's no clear one-size-fits-all system where we can say this is what you have to be doing because students absolutely love this, there's no flaws, crack on. That doesn't exist. It's not happening. And we also are really keen to provide that autonomy to departments. If we say to you, you have to do it this way because that's how it's done, then is that going to work for you? Every single department is so unique and different that we want to provide that autonomy so that you can do it in your own timescale, your own way, and make it work for you so that you also want to engage with it and you feel empowered to get involved with it. So that was really important to us as well, that we gave autonomy to departments. But we're also aware that in saying to departments, do what you would like, we are also creating really challenging conversations when we have two equivalent roles, one's paid and one's not. So we're aware that these challenging conversations are going to be happening next year when we have some unpaid positions and some that are paid. We're aware and we're ready for that. And we'll support departments through those challenging conversations as well, especially ones who last year did pay and now next year aren't. So that's fun. But to summarise that, this is kind of what's come out of the conversations with departments so far. Every department is doing something completely different, so it would take me ages to talk you through all 30 different ways of doing it. But these are the kind of 3 system overviews that we're looking at. System 1 is what we all know and love/hate, where you have your volunteer department rep and your volunteer course reps. Now, these positions are being filled with a variety of different methods. English fully recruited all their volunteer course reps. We had interviews with all of them, even though they're still volunteer, but they tried that way. Just asking for volunteers, all kinds of different ways of getting those course reps in place. But generically, that's what it looks like. You've got a volunteer system, department rep, course rep, bang. The next system, and kind of the most bespoke that's come out of this, because it's not one that we've done before, is a system where we've got your volunteer course reps, as always, but then your department rep is paid, which kind of gives them a bit more oomph, for want of a better word, and also a bit more, you're not doing your job, we pay you to do this, so if they're not coming to meetings, they're not doing what they're supposed to, departments and YUSU have more, not authority, but more of a case and ease to step in and interfere and make sure that the job is getting done, if that makes sense. So that's something new that's emerging. But this is where we're going to have the issues, where some are paid and some aren't. And then system 3 is the pilot project we had last year, where we have a group of representatives that aren't course level or department level, that kind of sit as a team, as you'll know in environment and geography, and they're all paid members. So those are the kind of 3 main systems that have come out of the woodwork with the work we've been doing this last term. So that's what's happening there. Okay. So now I'm going to kind of talk about what we can be doing to really empower students to engage. Like, we've had conversations with them, we know there are issues, and with everything being so different across the board, we just wanted to kind of give some quick wins of how we can really empower students to engage with those systems, to really give them their best shot of thriving. So I'm just going to talk through some of the things that we're doing and what you can be doing as well. So for us, we really noticed this thing about visibility. There is no clear visibility or communication from course reps throughout the year. So we have created slide templates where they just need to put in their name and their role, slot in a picture, and then any lecturer can just bang that up at the start of a lecture while everyone's coming in, and it's clear that's your course rep, just as a nice little reminder at the start or end or whatever. Just something really easy that students can use and implement and change. We've also got, we're going to be doing some Google form templates, just so that they can copy that and send it out. There were some issues last year in some departments where the tone of questions that reps had created wasn't great. So it's like, if we've got something that's generic and has a positive edge to it as well, so it's not always getting that negative feedback, then they can just send that out and make a copy and off they go. And we'll also do a template introductory email as well. So at the start of the year, they can just copy that, send it out, so it's really easy. They know what they need to say and what the key messages are they need to get across, and just give them that foot up for the rest of the year. So that's just kind of what we're doing that you know exists and can implement as well. And that's kind of where we want you to come in. Knowing who your reps are, whether you're teaching staff, support staff, it's really key to know who the reps are. And that did come up in the feedback, that students said, my lecturer doesn't know who the reps are, so even if I went to them with a problem, they wouldn't say, this is your rep, talk to them about it. And then what's happening there is that one tutor is dealing with 10 people coming to them with the same problem, when actually, if they just said, here's your rep, talk to them, they take that workload off staff too. So it benefits staff as much as students for you to know who the reps are. Out of office emails, with a bit of context. All your out of office emails always say contact this person for this or this person for that. It could be quite easy just to put a line in there about if it's feedback related to the course or the module, email your rep. And then all those emails as well are directed elsewhere and the rep can support that. You don't have to, I'm not saying you necessarily need to, it might not be applicable in your role, but just a really easy win, like just a reminder your rep exists. I'm not here, but your rep is, that kind of thing. Signposting to reps in a really similar kind of way. Like I said, if a student's coming to you with an issue, and it's quite common, say, look, a few people have come to me with this, if you all go to the rep, they can kind of collate your feedback together and present it in the right format, in the right way, and we can get an answer to you. That's not to say if it's an issue that you can't resolve it, you can say, I'll take that to this meeting, but if you also just let your rep know, so that they understand what's happening as well. because I don't want staff now to be like, no, I can't do anything, you have to talk to the rep, not me. You can still support them, but also make sure you're signposting to the reps as well. Allocating and allowing time, and that's in terms of, obviously we've talked about these slide templates that we're doing. It's just kind of allowing 5 minutes at the start of a lecture, in the break or at the end, just to offer the rep and say, look, would you like 5 minutes just to say hello? Would you like 5 minutes at the end to ask for feedback? Would you like me to put your slide in the lecture slide somewhere? Just offering that to them. It can be quite intimidating, especially for like first year reps to ask a lecturer for that, but I think if we're all open to allocating and allowing that time, it can make it easier for them if they also feel welcomed in that space. And from the feedback again, students are wanting that face-to-face interaction and that more frequent engagement with them, so a really easy way to just slot that in. Another thing that came up as well in the feedback is we know departments send out emails. Just having a bottom or a button or a line at the bottom that just says, here's where your reps are, remember your reps exist, these are the faces of your reps. Just something fixed at the end of every newsletter so that students don't have to go finding for that one email they got at the start of the year for that information. It's there every time, and it's a regular reminder that your reps exist. This is how you contact them. Talking to the reps as well. Just like conversations. I don't know how else to really elaborate on this one. But it doesn't always have to be a really formal thing where they have a problem. Like just having conversations regularly so there's that relationship so that then they feel more confident to come and talk to you if there are things going well or wrong. But just talking to them, knowing who they are and making them feel welcome and empowered in that space. Posters, again, we're doing templates for these things, so just if they want to put a poster up at the start of each lecture on the side of a room or a seminar or whatever, they could just stick it on the wall for that seminar, just as a visible thing, I'm here. So if there's a rep that wants to do that, just allowing them to do that. And support with events. Some of you might know academics and stuff that we've ran in the past, kind of coffee and cake events for those of you who don't know what an academic is. But supporting them that. We're really empowering department reps this year, especially paid ones, to take initiative and run those kind of events and support that academic community alongside DCCs or without DCCs, whatever the situation is with DCCs in your department. So if you know there's something going on, go, or just tell other students about it and just support them to achieve that. And then the hardest one for all of us is being receptive to feedback. It's really hard when someone comes to you and criticises something that you've done and maybe worked really hard on, and it's really easy to get offensive. We all do it. It's not a critique of anyone in this room, but students feel it, and even if it's just something, because we all know as well it's that thing of 1 year they want this, the next year they want that, but just being receptive to it and not immediately defensive, and if it is something you can't do, having that kind of justification and reasoning of it's not just because you've always done it, but it's because of these reasons, and being honest about things. Students appreciate that more than silence. So a hard one, but really key so that students and reps feel they can continue to come to you. Yeah, that's kind of everything. I did want to ask people, obviously we've talked about a few things here, but we're really keen to know, what do you need from us to support with academic representation? We've talked about some resources we're creating on a student-facing side, but staff-wise, what